In the fall of 1921, well-known aviator Ernst Udet teamed up with his financial backers, brothers William and Heinz Pohl, to design a new airplane. The goal was a light sports monoplane, which they designated the U-1. To develop this aircraft, Udet brought in a young, ambitious engineer and former military pilot named Hans Herrmann. After nearly a year of hard work, a brand new aircraft manufacturing company was officially founded on October 23, 1922. Erich Scheuermann came aboard as the technical director. They actually set up the main production facility right on his property in a Munich neighborhood. By the time he founded this company, Udet was already a household name across Germany. During the First World War, he had scored 62 confirmed aerial victories, making him the second highest-scoring German fighter pilot of the entire conflict, trailing only the legendary Manfred von Richthofen, under whom Udet had served in the famous Flying Circus. He was also the highest-scoring German ace to survive the war. That wartime celebrity gave his new aircraft venture an enormous head start in the public eye, and it also meant that whatever airplane bore his name would be watched closely by the German aviation press. What really stood out about the company was the sheer variety of its projects. Remarkably, in just 4 years of operation, they developed 11 distinct aircraft models. While most of these were light, single-engine airplanes, they also tackled absolute giants like the 4-engine U-11 Condor. And of course, this is where the legendary U-12 Flamingo sports and training biplane was born. To put that variety in perspective, the U-11 Condor was a genuine giant for its day. Its upper wing alone stretched 22 meters from tip to tip, or about 72 feet. Fully loaded, this 4-engine transport tipped the scales at more than 4.5 tons. Each of its 4 Siemens and Halske SH-12 radial engines produced around 100 horsepower, giving the Condor a top speed of roughly 152 kilometers per hour, or 94 miles per hour, and a service ceiling of about 3,200 meters. It is almost hard to believe that a small design team capable of building something this ambitious would, within months, also produce a machine as light and nimble as the Flamingo. As the designer Hans Herrmann later recalled, the idea for the U-12 Flamingo came from a severe shortage of simple, rugged, and above all reliable aircraft for training student pilots. At the time, most flight instructors were combat veterans. They were highly suspicious of monoplanes, especially when it came to training new pilots. As a result, in late 1924, the company began work on its 12th project, dubbed the Flamingo. Herrmann designed a classic single-engine biplane, built primarily of wood and plywood. Its defining visual feature was the upper wing, which was noticeably staggered forward compared to the lower wing. The entire airframe was kept as simple as possible to make maintenance and field repairs a breeze. In fact, the only truly complicated parts on the entire U-12 were the custom light alloy wing struts. Herrmann described his creation like this: the aircraft featured equal span wings. Thanks to the forward stagger, both the student and the instructor had excellent visibility from their open cockpits. To improve safety, the main fuel tank was housed inside the upper wing. This allowed for a simple gravity feed fuel system. It completely eliminated the need for complex, failure-prone fuel pumps. This design choice kept the risk of fire during a hard landing or crash to an absolute minimum. The engine itself was mounted directly to a dedicated firewall. The fuselage was constructed from incredibly tough plywood. To protect it from damage during rough landings, the belly was skinned in reinforced veneer. The wings and tail section were traditional wooden structures covered in standard aviation fabric. For added durability, however, the control surfaces were built around lightweight, fabric-covered metal frames. The landing gear was fairly conventional but included a clever feature. These were intentionally engineered failure points. During a hard landing, these points would snap first. This absorbed the impact energy and protected the rest of the airframe from severe damage. But the designer's true pride and joy was the flight control system, custom-tailored for flight training. Herrmann understood the psychology of student pilots perfectly, so he designed a unique feature. At any moment, the instructor could instantly disconnect the flight controls in the student's cockpit, and it did not matter whether the instructor was sitting in the front or rear seat. All they had to do was pull a single lever mounted next to them. This solved a massive problem in early aviation. It ensured that a panicked student's uncontrolled control inputs would no longer lead to a catastrophic crash. The designers planned to roll out this light aircraft in 5 different variants right from the start. The first version, the U-12A, was meant exclusively for basic flight training for student pilots. The next one, the U-12B, featured a slightly different wing profile. It was built for more experienced pilots and aerobatic training. The third variant, the U-12C, featured a smaller wing area. This gave it a higher landing speed. It also allowed pilots to practice advanced maneuvers. All 3 of these aircraft were powered by a reliable 7-cylinder SH-11 engine from Siemens and Halske. This air-cooled radial engine produced 96 horsepower. The SH-11 was a fairly advanced design for its day. First run on the test bench in 1925, this 7-cylinder radial displaced 6.5 liters, with a bore of 100 millimeters and a stroke of 120 millimeters. Fully dressed, the whole engine weighed only around 148 kilograms, or about 326 pounds. That lightweight up front, combined with the simple gravity-fed fuel system Herrmann had already designed into the airframe, was a major reason the Flamingo remained such a forgiving, well-balanced trainer. But for more demanding tasks, they needed more power, so they decided to equip the next 2 versions of the airplane. These were the U-12D and the U-12E. They featured a more powerful 9-cylinder SH-12 engine. This engine produced 125 horsepower. On top of that, the engineers even used this successful biplane design to develop a separate floatplane variant. This was designated the U-12W. The 9-cylinder SH-12 that powered these hotter variants proved such a solid design that it was later built under license across the Atlantic by the Ryan Aeronautical Corporation, which marketed its own version as the Ryan Siemens 9. Like its smaller SH-11 sibling, it was entirely air-cooled, which suited the simple, low-maintenance philosophy Herrmann had built into the Flamingo from the very start. Building the first prototype went surprisingly smoothly. There were no major hiccups. However, to conduct proper flight tests, the aircraft had to be transported to Oberschleißheim. The issue was that takeoffs at the factory airfield in Ramersdorf were only allowed under special circumstances. This definitely did not work for a flight test program. Finally, in early April 1925, the aircraft took to the skies for the very first time. Interestingly enough, the aviation press of the time somehow did not record the exact date of this historic event. It is only the historian Armand van Ishoven who notes this in his book. He states that this maiden flight took place on Tuesday, April 7th. The man at the controls was none other than the legendary pilot Ernst Udet himself. This debut flight was nothing short of spectacular. The airplane needed a takeoff roll of just 25 meters. This is about 82 feet. After that incredibly short run, the aircraft leaped off the ground. It was powered by an 80-horsepower Siemens and Halske SH-5 radial engine. That SH-5 dated all the way back to 1921, making it one of the very first radial designs to come out of the Siemens and Halske stable. It was also a 7-cylinder, air-cooled unit, sharing the same 6.5-liter displacement as its later SH-11 cousin, just tuned for a slightly lower output. The second he was airborne, Ernst Udet pulled back hard on the stick. He started putting the aircraft through a series of complex aerobatics. He executed loops and barrel rolls. And to cap off this incredible show, he pulled off a masterful dead stick landing. The pilot climbed out of the Flamingo prototype cockpit looking extremely satisfied. The only issue he pointed out to the engineers was about the rudder. He felt it lacked authority and needed a bit of tweaking. The entire development team felt a massive weight lifted off their shoulders. They were on a really tight schedule. In just 5 days, on April 12th, Ernst Udet was planning to fly out to Regensburg. He wanted to put on the very first of his famous flight exhibitions. Following that successful first hop, the factory pilots completed a few more test flights. They managed to iron out all the minor squawks they found. This took just 2 days of hard work. Thanks to this effort, chief designer Hans Herrmann and factory pilot Richard Kern got the aircraft ready. Richard Kern was a personal friend of Ernst Udet. Together, they were able to get the aircraft prepped and delivered exactly on time, fully airworthy. The first major air show took place on Easter Sunday in Regensburg. It was organized by the successful duo of Walter Angermund and the legendary Ernst Udet. The aircraft they flew had not actually completed its full flight test program yet, but that did not stop the pilots from leaving the local press absolutely thrilled. The aerobatics Ernst Udet pulled off were so spectacular and dangerous that the crowd held its breath. He would fly high up in the clouds one moment and buzz right down on the deck the next. The Flamingo's public debut was nothing short of brilliant. Shortly after this incredible success, Udet bought one of the first production airframes for himself. As for the very first prototype, some sources say it was later used for some interesting experiments. These included airdropping supplies to isolated mountain villages in the Alps. However, the story of this prototype ended in 1926 when it was heavily damaged during a crash in Oberschleißheim. Thanks to Udet's fantastic flying, the U-12 quickly became incredibly popular among aviators. It did not take long for the orders to start rolling in. One of the first buyers was Paul Bäumer. He was a renowned fighter ace who ran his own flight school near Hamburg at the time. But the first truly major customer turned out to be a company called Sportflug GmbH. In reality, this organization was just a front for the German armed forces, the Reichswehr. On top of that, in early 1926, the Hungarian government took a serious interest in the new trainer. They ordered 5 of them right out of the gate. Udet's own showmanship only grew from there. Over the following seasons, he refined a signature routine that became instantly recognizable to German crowds, swooping in low over the airfield and snatching a handkerchief off the grass with a small hook fixed to a wingtip. In October 1927, at an air display in Mannheim, organizers staged a friendly aerial duel between Udet and the celebrated French aerobatic pilot Michel de Troyes. The following year, at the German Aerobatics Championship held in Dusseldorf, Udet actually finished second, narrowly beaten by Gerhard Fieseler, who would later design the famous Fi-156 Storch liaison plane. Third place that day went to Willy, who was also flying a Flamingo. In the fall of 1931, Udet took his act across the Atlantic for the first time. Together with his mechanic Erich Bayer, he sailed to New York aboard the liner Europa, then flew his personal Flamingo at the National Air Races in Cleveland, Ohio, where his daring low-altitude routines impressed American audiences and rival pilots alike. Even though the base U-12A was already in full-scale production, the engineers knew the design needed further refinement. This model was usually powered by Siemens Halske SH5 or SH11 engines. The issue was that the designers had already increased the vertical tail area several times. Despite this, the aircraft's spin recovery characteristics remained pretty unpredictable and dangerous for the pilot. That is exactly why, in late 1925, Hans Herrmann initiated extensive aerodynamic testing. This took place at the German Aviation Research Institute in Berlin. Based on the results of these detailed wind tunnel tests, the tail surface area had to be increased yet again. But as a talented engineer, Hans Herrmann pushed for perfection. He wanted to get a better grasp of the inertial forces acting on the airframe during flight. Back then, computer modeling did not exist, so the only way to figure this out was experimentally through actual flight testing. To solve the weight and balance issues, the engineers decided to extend the nose section of the fuselage and the engine mount itself. This successfully shifted the aircraft's center of gravity forward and made it much more stable. When dealing with historical German aircraft, the aviation community standard is to use metric measurements. But for an American audience, it helps to have both. Thanks to these changes, the overall length of the aircraft grew from 6.85 meters, or about 22.5 feet. This happened to be the exact length of the first 30 U-12A airframes produced. The new design extended this to 7.5 meters, or roughly 24.6 feet. Because of this painstaking work, the final layout and design of the Flamingo trainer were officially finalized by the spring of 1926. Beyond its length, the finalized Flamingo carried a wingspan of 10 meters, or about 32 feet 8 inches, and stood 2.8 meters tall, around 9 feet 2 inches. Empty, the aircraft weighed only about 525 kilograms, or 1,157 pounds. Fully loaded with fuel, pilot, and instructor, it came in at around 800 kilograms, or 1,764 pounds. With the standard SH11 engine, a Flamingo could cruise at up to about 140 kilometers per hour, or 87 miles per hour, climb to a service ceiling of 3,700 meters, roughly 12,100 feet, and cover as much as 450 kilometers, about 280 miles, on a single tank of fuel. Unfortunately, even a resounding engineering success like this could not save the manufacturer from serious financial trouble. The company's management had simply overestimated their position in the market. They burned through way too many resources on their previous, and frankly, not very successful U-11 Condor project. In the end, the company could not manage the debt and went bankrupt. Then, on July 30th, 1926, the newly formed Bayerische Flugzeugwerke AG out of Augsburg acquired the company and all its designs. This opened a new chapter in the history of German aviation. In late 1926, after moving personnel and equipment to the German town of Augsburg, operations finally ramped up. They restarted production of the Flamingo training aircraft. This aircraft was an absolute lifesaver for the BFW company. During the difficult early days of their existence, they managed to put a highly advanced aircraft into series production. It was this single design that kept the company financially afloat for its first 2 years. Interestingly, BFW's technical director was the famous designer Willy Messerschmitt. His own company was absorbed into the enterprise in the fall of 1927. He initially saw no financial success from his own designs. The Flamingo trainers built in Augsburg were offered to customers in 2 main variants. The first was the BFW U-12A. It featured a slightly shortened fuselage and was powered by a Siemens Halske SH-11 engine. The second variant was the BFW U-12B. It was equipped with the more powerful 10-cylinder SH-12 engine. Unfortunately, exact production records for the BFW U-12 have not survived. However, aviation historians estimate that when production finally wrapped up in late 1929, around 120 Flamingos had rolled off the assembly line. Of those, only 15 were the more powerful U-12B variant. 2 of these, by the way, were custom-built for famous contemporary aerobatic pilot Thea Rasch. Rasch's connection to the Flamingo actually went back further than those 2 custom aircraft. She had learned to fly under none other than Paul Baumer, the same fighter ace and flight school owner near Hamburg, who was among the type's very first customers. In 1925, flying a U-12, Rasch became the first German woman to pass the demanding aerobatic pilot examination. 2 years later, her father bought her a BFW-built Flamingo-registered D-1120, and that July she sailed for the United States, the first of 5 separate trips across the Atlantic. She would go on to compete in the 1929 Women's Air Derby, nicknamed the Powder Puff Derby, and become a founding member of the 99s, the International Organization of Women Pilots. The company's subsequent single-seat designs were the BFW M1 Sperber and M3 Marabou. They failed to offer any significant advantages over the highly successful U-12. So who was buying these aircraft? The primary operators were organizations closely tied to the German military, the Reichswehr. This included major commercial airlines and the German Commercial Pilot School. At the time, almost every flight school in Germany quickly recognized the Flamingo as the premier primary trainer. The Commercial Pilot School, for example, operated a massive fleet of them from 1927 to 1932. During that period, around 150 early pilots completed their training on the type. The best of these graduates were hand-picked. They formed the solid backbone of the reborn German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. By 1933, the U-12 was gradually being phased out of state flight schools. Surviving airframes were transferred to various sports and political flying clubs starting in 1935. A handful of these Flamingos remained airworthy in these clubs right up until 1941. The Flamingo's success was not limited to Germany. It also drew significant international interest. Small export batches were sent to Italy, Sweden, and even China. But the largest foreign operator was Hungary. The Hungarian government ordered its first 5 U-12s in early 1926. The order was later expanded to 12 baseline aircraft. This was followed by another dozen of the more powerful U-12B variant. A year later, a talented Hungarian engineer named Sándor Lóczy began heavily modifying the German design. This work was done at the Central Military Aviation Plant. This upgraded variant was designated the Hungaria. Hungary soon launched series production. They rolled out 80 aircraft across 5 different variants. The last few Hungarias remained in service into the early 1940s. Interestingly, in 1941, a German film company bought one of these civilian aircraft. They bought it specifically to shoot the movie Quacks the Crash Pilot, known in German as Quacks der Bruchpilot. This was no small production. The comedy starred the enormously popular actor Hans Herrmann, who in real life was a passionate sport pilot and owned both a Focke-Wulf FW-44 Stieglitz and his own personal Flamingo, both based at Berlin's Tempelhof Airport. Directed by Kurt Hoffmann, the film premiered in Hamburg on December 16, 1941, and went on to become one of the biggest box office successes of the war years, pulling in roughly 5 million Reichsmarks. The Flamingo used on screen carried the fictional registration DEMMA. It had originally been built at the BFW works and exported to Hungary, before being brought back to Germany specifically so the film crew could use it. Around the same time, another Hungarian factory built an additional 40 BFW U-12B aircraft under license. The aircraft's reach was constantly expanding. In September 1928, neighboring Austria secretly purchased 10 BFW U-12A aircraft. This deal was a front. It allowed them to covertly train military pilots under the guise of a local airline in Graz-Tallerhof. The Austrians liked the aircraft so much that from 1930 to 1932, they built 20 more airframes under license, and just 2 years later, 12 Su-12As rolled off the assembly line. This was a significant local upgrade to the original design. Key updates included an incredibly strong welded steel tube fuselage. The aircraft also received completely new, highly reliable landing gear struts. These struts forgave cadets for even the hardest landings. The smallest country to acquire a production license for the aircraft was Latvia. In the summer of 1928, the Latvian government bought a single BFW U-12. This purchase also included the full rights for its serial production. Christian Bachmann's company took on this ambitious task. Interestingly enough, the firm's main business was large-scale coal trading. However, they just so happened to have a fully equipped aircraft factory among their assets. The facility already had solid manufacturing experience. Back in 1925, they successfully assembled Albatross B-2 biplanes for the Latvian Air Force. Starting in the summer of 1929, the factory managed to build 10 new BFW U-12s. The process was anything but easy. Local engineers and workers ran into serious trouble. They struggled with manufacturing and machining the duralumin components. Despite these technical hurdles, by the following summer, the Latvian aircraft builders had fully completed the government contract. The planes turned out to be extremely reliable. 11 years later, most of them were still in active military service. They remained operational right up until Latvia was annexed by the Soviet Union. Sadly, not a single original U-12 Flamingo is known to survive today anywhere in the world. The type's memory has instead been kept alive through painstaking reconstruction. Members of the old-timer Segelflugverein München, a vintage aviation club, spent roughly 8,500 volunteer hours over a full decade building a flying replica from scratch. It first took to the air in 2004, wearing the registration DEOSM and the christened name Willy Messerschmitt, and was based at the Deutsches Museum's Flugwerft Schleißheim, the very airfield where the original Flamingo first flew back in 1925. This replica suffered a serious takeoff accident at the Tankosch Vintage Aviation Gathering in Tannheim in August of 2013, but volunteers spent years afterward rebuilding it. Today, it stands fully restored inside the museum's historic hangar, a faithful reminder of the little biplane that once taught a generation of German pilots how to fly. To wrap up this story, a huge thank you goes out to the people who made gathering this unique historical data possible. Massive respect goes to Günter Klug from EADS in Augsburg. We also extend our gratitude to the EADS Heritage, OTN, and DEHLA historical archives. They generously shared rare photos and valuable materials. Special thanks for the research assistance goes out to Karl-Heinz Kenz. We also thank a longtime Swedish friend, Hi Ule. Their contributions truly help preserve these lesser-known chapters of aviation history.